Welcome back, aliens. My name is Devin Reddy, and in this video, we are going to build a project using Spring Boot. Now, of course, multiple tools we are going to use. We are going to use Spring Boot to build the project. We'll be using IDE, and we are going to use Postgres as our database. And also, when we are building this application, this is a web application, and we don't have a front end for it because we are trying to build an application for the back end. And for front end, you can build your own front end, or you can use something like Postman to verify if everything is working or not. Basically, you can test your APIs. So we need some services. Of course, in the video, you'll understand what we are going to build. But in this particular quiz, this is what you will see in the output, right? So we'll have a quiz service, we'll be having a question service, and you can ask for questions, you can ask for a quiz. And as a user, when they try to submit a quiz, let's say you get 10 questions. When they submit the questions, what you will see is the score as well. So again, we have to do that computation as well. And as I mentioned before, this will be a web application with the help of Spring Boot. And when you say Spring, there is also something called MVC. We have multiple layers here. We got model, view, controller. And we also have service layers. We also have a database layer. We are going to use Spring Boot, Spring Code, Spring DataJPA. In this course, I'm not going to teach you Spring Boot from the scratch. Of course, you need to know Spring Boot. We are basically building a project of whatever knowledge you have. Okay, so once the video starts, I will also talk about what is QuestionService, and then we'll start building the entire project step by step. And at any given point, if you face an issue, don't worry. In the description, you will find a Discord link. Now, the Telusko family is there on Discord, and try to post your question there, and people who are there will also try to answer, and that's how you learn, right? By helping each other. So I hope you will enjoy the experience of building a project, and see you in the comments. We are going to build a quiz service, okay? A quiz application basically. Now, when you say quiz, what it means, it simply means a user is coming to the application, a user will get, let's say 10 questions, a user will attempt those questions, it will be MCQs basically. And then based on what you choose, you will get that much of score. That's the entire plan, right? Now, to achieve that, of course, we need questions, right? So we need, let's say 10, 15 questions in the database. So we are going to use Postgres, which is our database for this particular session. And then we'll also have a Java application, a simple Spring Boot application to do that. And we'll start with the questions, okay? So we'll start with the question part, and then we'll see how do you create a quiz from the questions. And when you say questions, you need to create questions, you need to update questions, you need to delete questions, you need to read questions. So basically you need to do CRUD operations with question, and that's what we're going to start here. Now, to achieve that, we need to first create a very simple project, right? So what I will do is I will head back to Spring Initializer, which is that's where you will get Spring Boot project. Of course, if you have a IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate version, you can directly create from there. Or if you have STS, which is Eclipse Enterprise version, you can do it from there. But this is good. So let's say I'm creating a Maven project, and then, so where I'm going, so if you're new to Spring, basically I'm going to start.spring.io. See, for this type of sessions, I'm expecting you to know a bit of Spring because we're not going to completely get into Spring framework. I will show you certain things, and I expect you to know Spring Boot, okay? At least the basics of it. Okay, so project we are creating is Maven. The language we are going for Java. Of course, you can choose Kotlin, Groovy here. For project, you can choose Gradle if you want, but let's say if I'm going for Maven here. And then the version of Spring Boot I'm going for is 3.1. You can choose whatever version you want. And then the group ID, I want it to be com.telusko. And the project which I'm creating is quiz app. And then we can put some description, Telusko quiz app. And we want to create a package of jar, and then the version of Java is 17, which I have in my machine. Now, what kind of dependencies we need? First of all, we need Spring Web because that's very important. We need to create a web application. We also need to connect with database. And which database you are working with? We are working with Postgres, so I will add that. Also, I want to have a post DataJPA because that's how I'm going to connect with my Spring application and database. So I want DataJPA. And then I don't want to actually have bulky code, at least for models. So I want to use Lombok there. Just again, Lombok is something you can, if you want to use it, you can use it, or you can keep it option. So that's my Lombok there. I think that's done. So we got our project here. So click on generate, it will create a project for you. You just have to unzip this. So after unzipping, you can see this is your project. I want to open this project from my IntelliJ IDEA. Of course, you can use any IDE, that doesn't matter. You can use Eclipse, you can use VS Code, that's your choice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my IntelliJ IDEA, which is the ultimate version. You can also use community version, that works. And I will click on open project. And I'm going to open the project which we have downloaded on open. And you can see we got our project ready here. One more thing, since we have our database in Postgres, you can use any database. So I'm going to use Postgres. So let me open Postgres here. Oh, in fact, we have to open pgadmin. And if I open pgadmin, it will take some time. So asking for the password for my machine, it is 0000 because this is my testing machine or for recordings. So I will just open this, again asking for password. And you can see we got our pgadmin ready here. And if I expand this, if I expand my databases, if I expand QuestionDB, this is basically my database, which is I have there. Of course, we should have gone for a good name, but this works. And if I go down to schemas, so you can see we have table. And at this point, we only have one table, which is question, because that's how we want to work with. And in this question table, I already have data. So if I want to show you that, I will just say view all rows. You can see we have all this data here. Now this is what I want to fetch from the web application basically. So you can see we have all these rows. In fact, we have 16 rows. There are a few questions which are from Java. There are a few questions which are from Python. Of course, I can change it to small letter so that it will be in the same range. But that's fine. You can see we got how many columns we have. So if I try to see the columns here, you can see we got ID where we have the primary key. We got category because that's how you differentiate different questions for the particular subject. We got difficulty level, which is for do you want to keep this test easy or difficult. We also have options. You can see we have 4 options here. And then we got question title, we got right answer. So basically we have all this column. Of course, we'll go through this once again when you want to create that model. So that's what I want, right? So what I will do is I will just go back to my IntelliJ, and here I want to do certain things because I want to get that data. Now, how do you get that data? So basically, let's say if I go to my browser and if I type this, if I say localhost /8080/questions/all questions, basically I want to display everything in this page. That's my first task. Okay. So we'll divide the project into a few tasks so that it will be easier to follow up, and then you can also practice one by one. So basically this is the first target. Let me get all the questions so that I can see on the browser. Of course, we can also use Postman to send the request and stuff. We'll do that later. At this point, let me use browser. And if I go back to my IntelliJ, so how do I do that? So first of all, to accept the request, at this point, you can see it is not, the site is not reaching. Okay, first of all, make sure that in your POM, you have all this configured. So you can see we have DataJPA, we got web, we got Postgres, we got Lombok. So make sure that you have this. Lombok is optional, as I mentioned before. So if I go back to main, now this is where I want to create my REST controller. Okay, so I will just right click here and say new class, and I want this class to be named as question controller. Okay, now this is where I want to accept the request. So what I will do is I will just make this as a REST controller because I want to accept the request. And also this particular question controller will only work with question. Of course, in the future videos, when we talk about quiz, how do we create a quiz? So a quiz will ask you, hey, what type of quiz you want to create? Tell me the topic name, tell me difficulty level. And based on that, it will generate random 10 questions. Now for that, you'll be having a different controller. So this is question controller. You'll be also having quiz controller, right? So I want to specify the path here as well. What I can do is I can say request mapping. And in this request mapping, basically we'll mention the path. So whatever request is coming for question, this is the controller who will handle it, right? Now, basically what I want to do is I want to accept that request of /all questions. So for that, we have to create a method. So I will say public, it should return, let's say a string initially, and we'll change it later. And here I will say get all question. That's my method name, right? And this method is not actually accepting anything because we are not passing any parameter. We're just saying all questions. And of course, this should match with this. So I will just copy this, and you can see the URL. It is the localhost 8080 because that's on the same machine. The port number for my server is 8080 by default. And this is the question for the question part, for the question controller. Once we have a quiz, we'll have a quiz there. And then we have our all question. So here, I want to map it with all questions, right? So I will say get mapping. And here, the path is my all questions. So if someone is requesting for all questions, this is the method I want to execute. And what I want to return here, very simple stuff. I will say, hi, this are your questions. Just to keep it simple, let's see if this works. And I will save this. Let's run this code. Okay, how do I run this? So basically, this is a Spring Boot app, right? And to make it work, you have to basically go to the application, right click, run. Okay, it says Lombok requires enabling. Okay, I will do that. Okay, now there is certain problem to this project. The thing is, we have initialized in our POM file, we have mentioned that we are using DataJPA, right? And then we have not done any configuration for that. Is that the issue here? It says fail to start. The reason is we have not mentioned any Postgres URL. Okay, that's the issue here. So what I will do is, let me just configure that. So again, you can just copy paste this stuff and you can use it later. So the first thing you have to mention is the driver class name, and the driver we are using here is Postgres driver. The next one we have to use here is the URL, and the URL is jdbc:/postgres sql://localhost:/. Now the port number for Postgres is 5432. And then you have to mention database name. Database name for us is QuestionDB, right? Then you have to set the username password for Postgres. So I will say Spring Data Source, username is Postgres, and password as well. So we'll set the password as 0000. That's for my machine. And then you have to basically also enable DDL auto. So DDL auto, if you want to create the table, if you don't have it, so I will say update. I do have a table, but let's say if you want to set this. And also I want to, so let me type it, spring.jpa.properties.hibernate. Now this is where you have to set the dialect, right? So it is, why is not coming automatically? So it's org.hibernate. You don't have to by heart this. Basically, I also have nodes for it. So dialect.postgres SQL dialect. Okay, so once we have assigned these properties, I think it should work now. Again, we are not using them, but then since we have added DataJPA, so it's become compulsory to add this. So I will go back to my application and I will run this. Now you can see this time, no problem. The server is running on 8080, and let's go back to our browser, refresh, and you can see we got the output. It says, hi, these are my questions. Of course, we have not sent any questions, but let's say this is the output. But I want to return the real questions, right? How will I do that? Okay, so till this point, we were able to create our project, and now we need to execute certain things, right? Basically, if a user is asking for all the questions, we need to return all the questions, not just saying that, hey, this is your questions. We need to actually print those questions. So if you go back to your browser, and if you execute this, which is questions, okay, not questions, it should be question, because that's the request mapping. Enter, it should print this. It should print, these are your questions, right? Okay, but then we want to print the actual questions which is coming from database. And I have shown you, right? In database, we have all those questions here, as you can see. Okay, so how do we achieve this? So what we can do is, let's go back here and actually fetch questions from database. Now for this, we need multiple layers. So basically, whenever you build a web application, we use different layers there. So this is your controller, right? So this is your main controller. This is responsible to accept the request from the user. And then the request goes to the service layer. Now we have one more layer in between, which is your service layer. The work of a service layer is to do some processing. Let's say if you want to add two numbers. Now, as a client says, okay, I want to add 2 plus 3. Now this data goes to the controller, because controller is responsible to communicate with the user. But then controller will not add these two values. Controller will simply say, okay, I got these values. Now I need someone to add these values. So the request goes to the service layer. Now in service layer, you mention all your business logic. What you need to do when you get these values, what operation you want to perform. So that's the job of service layer. Now service layer can do any business logic. It can do any processing, any type of calculation you want. But what if you want to fetch data from database? Now, in that case, you have one more layer, which is your DAO layer. Now, this DAO layer is responsible to actually connect with database and fetch data. Okay. Now let's say on the service layer, you want to get data from database. Of course, you get data from the DAO layer, but also you can do some logical processing inside your service layer. Okay, so we got 3 layers here, and that's what we want to do here. So basically, let's say we are in the controller now, and inside the controller, I'm saying, hey, we just want to, instead of returning the text, I want to return the actual data. So what I want to return is, I want to get data from the service layer. Now, basically, let's create a object of service layer, which is question service. And this question service will ask, hey, get me all questions. Most of the time, you will have the same method names, but sometimes it can be different. Okay, so it depends upon the use case. At this point, I'm assuming that in my service class, I have the same method. Now, the weird thing is we don't even have a service class. So let's create one. Of course, you can just right click here. You can create a service class. We can do that. Let's say new, and I'm creating a new class, and I will name this class as question service. And then I just also want to make sure that this class service belongs to a service package. It's a good idea to move things in a different package, depending upon the use case or depending upon the type of the service or class you're creating. So this is service. All the service classes goes into service package. All the controllers goes into controller package. So we have to do that. So move the package to service. And it says it's not able to find one. No issue. Let me just create a service package. Now, once we have created the package, now I can move to the service package. Okay, so you can see now the service is into service. In fact, for controller as well, it is always a good idea to put that in a different package. So package, I will name this as a controller. And now even this goes to the controller. Of course, you can also drag it there, refactor, it will work. So if I expand this, you can see we have a controller and controller package. Okay, so in this, basically in this service, I want to make sure that I have that method. So if I go back to my controller, see, we'll not be working with this. So I can just close this, and application properties one set. You don't need to do anything with that. Let me close it. I just want to keep it simple. We got 2 windows open here, controller and service. So if I go back to controller, of course, I need the object of service. So what I will do is I will say question service, and this should be question service. So you can see I'm creating a reference. And also, since we are using a Spring framework, I don't need to say new question service. What we can do is we can use auto wired here. And then, okay, that's auto wiring. The only thing that we do is on top of this class, since you want Spring to handle these objects, you can use annotations. Now, if you want Spring to create the object, of course, you can use add component. But Spring also provides you some different annotations, which does the same work of component, but different names, which is one of it is service. Now, of course, you can also add component, but since it's a service layer, let's write service. So go back here, and you can see auto wiring done. There's no problem with this. There's a warning for auto wire. Field injection is not recommended. Yeah, you can go for constructor or setters, but okay, let's ignore that. Now, once we got this, we can get all questions. But unfortunately, if you look at this service class, we don't have any method. So of course, I can type it here, or I'm lazy. I'll just go here and say, hey, get all the questions. But there's one thing before I do that. See, when you say you get all the questions, will you get one question or multiple questions? Or we don't even have a model here. So the thing is, how will you represent a question? So if you go back to your database, you can see you have multiple columns here, right? You can see we got ID, we got category, we got difficulty level, option 1, option 2, option 3. And if I scroll a bit, you can see we have option 4, question title, right answer. Oh, so many parameters, right, or the columns. So to represent each table, we create a class. Okay, we call them as entities. And we also call them as model in MVC patterns, right? So what I will do is, just to represent that, even before we get all the questions, it is a good idea to create a class which will be your question class. Now, this is your model class, okay? And this will have those variables. So you can think about a class design matching with the table design. So class name, table name, the class fields are your table columns, right? And also the number of objects you have for a class, each object can represent a row, right? That's your ORM, object relational mapping. Okay, so here what I will do is I will create those variables quickly. So what are the variables? We have? So first of all, we have an ID. So I will simply say private integer ID. That's the first column. The second one we have is question. So I can say question title. Of course, we need to match the variable name here and with the column name there. Otherwise, you have to specify what column name you are using in the table. Okay, so if you look back to your table and if you scroll a bit, you can see we have question title here. So automatically it will put underscore because in SQL it follows a snake casing rule. So basically we have to put underscore between two words. But in Java we use camel casing, we use a capital letter. So the ORM framework, in this case we are using JPA, will take care of it. Then we got option 1 and likewise we got option 2, 3, 4. What I can do is, as I'm lazy, I will just say paste one more time because for the answer as well. So this is option 2, this is option 3, this is option 4, and this is my right answer. The next thing we need is difficulty level. As we mentioned before, we have 3 levels here: easy, medium, difficult. So for that also I can use a string. Of course, you can also do that with the help of numbers. But since in the database we already have created a column which is difficulty level, which is of type string. So we'll go with that. So difficulty level. The thing is, I should be using a capital 1, but the thing is, here if you see database, the difficulty level is still the same. There is no underscore here. So we cannot put a capital L. So again, when you design the application, you design in a proper way. I just did that, I created this table with a name and then now I'm trying to match it. Okay, so ignore that part. So the good way is to have that capital L so that you will get underscore in the table. Okay, and here we need to make sure that this ID is a primary key, right? The way you do that is by mentioning the ID as the annotation. And also this ID will be auto-generated. So what you can do is you can say generated value and you can specify this strategy, which is generated type sequence. Okay, if this doesn't work, I will go for the identity. Let's see how that works. Okay, so now for the question, also we have to use and annotation. So basically what happens is we want this table to get mapped with the class, right? So if you want to do that mapping, we have to use something called an entity, which is annotation. If you have a different table name, so example, here the table name is question itself, so there's no problem. But if you have something else, then you have to use at table as well. And since I'm using Lombok here, I don't want to, normally if you don't use Lombok, for every variable here, we need to create 2 methods, getter and setters, 2 string method also. So imagine how lengthy the code becomes. And that's what's a good idea to put at data here, which is coming from Lombok, and we are done. So we got this question, no problem. Now let's go back here. In fact, this also recommends that you use this. It says typo. So what is suggesting to? Okay, it's not giving any suggestion, but it says there's a typo because we have not used capital. But that's fine. I can say I can live with that. Okay, so if I go back to controller now, so what do you think? Will I represent a string or the object? Of course, it should be object this time, right? So we don't want to return a string. We want to return an object. But then how many objects we're going to return? 1, 2, multiple, right? So this should not be a simple question. First of all, let's import the package. So it says there are multiple classes, multiple choice. Import class. Okay, there's a question in inbuilt package as well. I will use mine. And then we have to make sure that we are returning a list of questions, not one. Okay, so we have to import the list as well. Done. And now actually we can work with get all questions. So what I will do is I will just ask the IDE to create a method called or get all questions. And you can see the method we got in QuestionService. It's just that we have to provide some logic. Now, of course, the service here is not doing any processing. It's just fetching data from the DAO layer. Oh, we don't have a DAO. So what I will do is I will create a class. I will name this class as question DAO. And then we have to make sure that this belongs to a different package, a DAO package. And we have to create a DAO package here. We'll say new package DAO and just move this to DAO. Done. Okay, now this looks cool. We got DAO as well. And the thing is, on top of service, we are returning service here, right? on top of DAO, we have to mention it is a repository. Okay, now the fun part is when you say we have a DAO here, and of course there will be a method as well. Example, if I go back here and when I say get all questions, there should be a method in, because see, ultimately I have to use DAO, right? Example, I will just come back here and I will say, hey, you know, I want the question DAO object here so that I can call the methods, and I want this to be auto-wired. So that's done. And then using this DAO, question DAO dot, I can fire a method, right? So of course in the DAO as well, we'll be having the same method, which is get all questions, right? So this should be simple. And then once you get all the questions, we can return it. But the thing is, in question DAO, we don't have that method. So what you will say, hey, you know, just create the method. Okay, even if I create the method, we have to fetch data from database. Now, if you know JDBC, basically we have to write those beautiful 7 steps, right? It looks like 7 steps, but the code is very lengthy. You have to fire the SQL query. You will get a lot of data. You have to iterate between that data and convert that into a list of questions. Oh, a lot of work, right? Don't worry, we got you covered. That's what Spring says. Spring says, one of the package we have introduced here, if you go back to pom.xml, one of the package we got here is DataJPA, right? Now, with the help of DataJPA, what you can do is, instead of creating a class, we can create an interface. And then we just need to extend an interface called JPA repository. That's it. All the things like fetching data from database, saving data will be handled by DataJPA. I know that sounds like a magic, right? But then, okay, so before we do that, so JPA repository asks you for 2 things. What type of table you're working with, and what is the type of primary key, which is integer here. So you have to mention 2 things. The table name, actually you have to mention the class name, which maps to the table. And also you have to mention the primary key type. That's it. Now, I know you're not trusting me there, right? You'll be like, hey, that's impossible. Let's go back to our service. And of course, you can see it's not working. This method is not there. If this method is not there, there might be some other methods. Let's try it out. I will say dot. And can you see that if I scroll down, there are so many methods here. One of the method is find all. It will give you the list of questions. Example, if I jump here, you can see find all gives you a list. We just have to use it. So it will return the list of questions. Our job is done. Are you still not trusting me? Just wait and watch. Let me just restart the server because we have made some changes. Of course, we should have gone for dev tool for the hot boot. Okay, now let's go back to the browser and refresh. Boom. Can you see that? Okay, this is a raw. The thing is, if you are getting this type of output on your screen, and I can get this is because I have installed one of the plugin. It is called a JSON formatter. Okay, so because of this JSON formatter, it gives you this beautiful JSON look. And you can see we got all the questions. Doesn't matter the topic. Oh, did I just forgot this topic name? Yeah, we forgot the category. Oh, how can I do that? So if I go back here, in my question, we don't have category. In table, we had that. So category. Okay, now let's restart and go back to our browser, refresh, boom. You can see we got the category as well. So we got Java, Python. We have 2 categories at this point, which we are using it here. Cool. So this is how you can fetch data, right? And we have done with the fetching part. What about fetching by category? So at this point, we were able to fetch data, and make sure that before you go for the next video, you actually practice this. Okay, cool. So if you talk about fetching all data, we are doing that. But what if you want to fetch based on a category, something like this? I can go back here. I can say, hey, I don't want all the questions. I want to fetch based on a category. That too, it should be, let's say, Java. And if you say enter, it should only print questions for Java. And if you mention, let's say, not Java, but Python, it should print all the Python questions. And also I want to add questions. I want to delete questions. Maybe let's only work with add, delete and update. You can do it by yourself. Okay, so now let's add these 2 services. Basically, we want to make sure that if you want to get the questions, we should be able to get that with the help of category. And also, what if you want to add a question? So let's do that. So first, let's work around this, which is, so if you remember, this is what we were doing, right? So if you want to fetch based on a category, let's say if I want to fetch questions only for Java, it's not working at this point. We want to make it work. So what I will do is I will go back to my IDE, and here let's add, because of course we have to first add a controller, right? So what I will do is I will say public, and of course this will also return the list of questions which we want. And then I can say get questions by category. Of course, your method name should make sense by reading it. Now this time, this get question category will actually accept a value, because you have to mention the category, right? So if you look at the address bar, you can see this value will be keep changing. So this will be Java, this will be Python, or whatever topic you have there. Okay, so let's accept that here. So I will say string category. So whatever data you will be sending in the URL will be received here in this category. But then how do you map it? So of course we have to say get mapping, because we are getting data. And now in this bracket, we have to mention the request is going for the category this time, not all questions, and slash. Now, of course, the category word is important is because that's what we are doing here, right? See, question is by default for the entire controller. You can see we got question here. And then we are specifying that we want to go for a specific category. And that's why we have to mention category here. And then in this here, in this curly brackets, we'll mention the topic. So whatever topic you're receiving. So let's say if you want to fix it for Java. So this particular method will be called only for Java. Of course, you have to do it for the other technology as well. Now, of course, we don't want to write multiple methods for each language or each topic, right? So it makes sense to put that as a variable. So we'll put that in a curly bracket. So whatever value you will receive here will be assigned to this variable, but will it be happening directly? No, we have to actually put an annotation here, which is called path variable. So whenever we are passing a value in the path, which is the address bar, the address, that particular value, which is in the curly brackets, will be assigned to this particular variable. Now, since the names are same, you don't have to specify the name here. Normally, if you have a different name, let's say here, you don't have category, you have cat. So in that case, here we have to mention which variable we are targeting. So we are targeting a variable cat. But since they are same, I will not be mentioning that. I will just go with category here. Now, once you specify that, we need to return the values, right? Of course, we can simply do that. We can return question service. Of course, we as a controller, we don't have to do any extra work. We'll simply ask our service, hey service, give me questions based on the category. So I can say get questions by category. But unfortunately, okay, we have to also specify the category here, because how will service know which category you're talking about? So basically here, this particular thing, this is not there in the service. So what I will do is I will just click here and I will say, hey, give me a method. So I want this method to be there in the service, because service is responsible to give me data. But service says, how will I give you that? I don't have it, right? Of course, you can do processing in service. Example, what if you want to check for the category length? Let's say if you specify Java, if you want to know length of the string, of course, why we will do that. But the thing is, we need to fetch data from database now. And that's where the DAO comes in. So we'll say questions, question DAO dot, and we'll say, hey, question DAO, find, because see, when you interact with DAO, basically, since we're using JPA repository, instead of using get, we'll be using find, because that's the standards we follow, right? So we'll say find. Okay, but then we don't have any method. If you see, we don't have a method which gives you by category. Of course, if you want a particular question, you can get it by saying find by ID. So let's say there is a question with the ID 50. So you can say, hey, I want a question by 50. So it's easy to get with the primary key. But now we are getting data from one of the column. Unfortunately, we don't have it. Now you will say, okay, so I know what you're thinking. You will say, okay, in that case, we have to create a method which we have to define everything, how you're getting to fetch based on the category by using some SQL query. Okay, so not there and not even completely, because we don't have the method yet. So let's find a middle way. So what we can do is, JPA is actually smart enough to do this. What you can do is you can say find by category, okay? And then in the bracket, you can mention string category, and your job is done. It's just that you have to specify what type of data it will return. So this should return the list of questions. Now the thing is, do we have to write an SQL query? Do we have to define this method? No. The thing is, category is actually a part of a table, right? So your DataJPA of Spring is smart enough to understand that a user is trying to find data based on a category. So it is simple. Yeah, if you want to do a lot of customization, then it will not work. That's where you have to use SQL. Oh, that's where you have to use HQL, which is the Hibernate query language. Or you can use JPQL, which is JPA query language. So you can do that. But at this point, we don't need any specific HQL query or JPQL query for that matter. And this will work. Okay, so JPA is smart enough to give you data because the column is present in the table. If you go back here, now if you say control space, you will get this method which is find by category, and you have to pass this particular string, and that's it. This will return the list of questions. I know a lot of things looks like magic here, but that's Spring framework for you. Now, if I say everything looks good, let's relaunch the application. Don't give me this dialog every time. Okay, let's go back to our browser. Let's say refresh, and voila. Can you see that we got all the questions for Java, Java, and Java? But yes, if you specify something else here, if you specify, let's say Python, it will give you questions for Python, if you can see. But what if you specify something which is not there? Example, let's say if you search for Kotlin, enter empty, because we don't have anything for Kotlin. So that's how we can basically use this. We can get the categories. Okay, but what about add questions? So we know now how do you fetch all the questions. We know how to fetch questions by category, which is one of the column we have. Now let's try to work around with add. So what I will do is, let's say if I look at my database, I can do it from here itself. And if I say Java, you can see we have all these questions for Java. The last ID we have for Java is 10. Of course, after that we have Python questions. I just want to know which is my last ID which we have. So if I go back to my pgadmin, we got 16 questions. Now I'm trying to add one more question, which is 17th. Okay, let's do that. So what I will do is I will just try to create a method, and this will be for adding string or adding question. But then what will I return? So maybe I want to return a message by saying, okay, it was successful or something. And then I can say not get question, add question. And then in bracket. Now, if you are sending a question from a client side, of course, right? If you are fetching data on the browser, maybe you want to send data from the browser or from the mobile application, doesn't matter. The client can be anything here. Okay, how will I receive data? So when you say add questions, it should be in a format of a question itself, right? So whatever I will receive should be a question so that I can add it. I don't want to receive a text file, let's say CSV, and then manually from the code, I will just fetch each value. Oh, that will be tiring, right? Or what if you can get the JSON format? So from the client side, let's receive JSON, because that's what client is receiving, right? So if you look at the client, this is the data which you're receiving, right? So this is a question basically in the JSON format. So the same format we have to send from the client to server. Now question arises, if you receive JSON on the server side, do we have to manually change it? No, that's where Spring says, don't worry, I'm there. Spring will say, you just specify the JSON, I will convert that into an object. But you have to also mention one more annotation here, which is called a request body, because you are sending this data in the request from the client side to the server in the body. Okay, so in a request, you have multiple sections. In the body, you will be having the data. Let's use that and create this question. I will show you how do we pass data. Now, once you have those questions, let's say we received the question. How will you add that in database? Again, simple. You can use QuestionService by saying, hey, QuestionService, add this question for me. And the question is question. Okay, the service will say, hey, I know you want to add questions, but I don't have this method. We can say, okay, I'm a programmer. Let me create a method which is add question. This should return a string. And then here, I will simply add it. Now, how will you add it? The way you did find all, the way you did find by category, there should be a method in DAO, which you don't have to define, right? So let's try. I will say, hey, question DAO, I know you are Superman or Superwoman. Do you have a method to add it? Oh, we don't have add, but do we have some other thing? We have save. In this save, just say question and done. There's no error. Okay, this looks cool, but we have to also return something, right? So what I will do is, let me see if save returns something. So save returns the type S extends T, the type. Okay, so it basically works with the type of data. So what I will do is I will just return manually string here and say return success. We should also return failure if something goes wrong. But yeah, we'll do extra stuff. How do you handle exception? How do you work with the status code as well? Because Till this point, we are just working with data, right? But if you really want to use the power of HTTP, we have status codes as well, like okay, you might be knowing about 404, right? Not found. So basically all those are status codes. Like we have 200 for okay, we have 500 for server error, we have 400 series for the return data error. So there are different type of errors which we'll see later. But at this point, we are just returning success, nothing much. And okay, we are returning success here. In fact, we should return things which are coming from the DAO. So I will not return success. I'll just cut this part and paste it here. The success should be returned from the service itself. So if I go back to service, this is responsible to return, I don't know, when I shifted to the next tab, something went wrong there. But I wanted to write success in add question, in the string. Okay, this looks good. There's no problem which I can see. Even if you get some errors, we'll solve it, don't worry. Okay, so this is, okay, main thing is missing here. We have to set the mapping as well, right? Now, what type of mapping you're going to get here? The thing is, when you fetch data from a server, we normally go for get mapping, which is get method. When you want to send data to the server, we use something called post. So here, we have to use a post mapping. And in this post mapping, we will be specifying the address. So we are posting a question and then we are submitting data, right? So question should be, okay, the main is question. Maybe I can say add, yeah. So let's say I'm using add here. So question/add will add a new question, okay? So now will this work? That's the question. Oh, not intended, okay? So what I will do is I will just go back to my, we have to run the server first. Let's restart the server. And how will I get this? How will I run this? Now, basically, in the browser, basically, what you can get is you get the address bar and you can get data. If you want to send data, you have to create a form or something like that to send JSON. And that's where the tools using which you can interact with the APIs. So that's right. These are APIs which we have exposed. We use something called Postman. So there are a lot of tools available. Let me introduce you to Postman. This is how Postman looks like. You can download it from the Google. It's very easily available. And in the Postman, basically you can see we get this type of prompt. If you get some welcome screen, we can close it. Now here, we can specify the method which we want to go with, get, post or something. And here we have to specify the URL. So let's start with the this particular URL. Let's paste it here, say send, and you can see you will receive all the data. So you got data. And if you observe, you also got a status here, which is 200. So if everything goes well, by default, it will give you 200, but of course you can customize it. You can specify some other number, like we can have 201, 202, you can do that. Okay, but now I don't want to go for get, I want to go for add. How do you add something? In that case, first of all, let me just copy one of the JSON because I'm very bad with JSON. I'll just copy this. And here I will say post because now we want to send data, right? And then we have to change the URL as well, which is question/add. That's what we are working now. Okay, but how do you send data? Because if you do that now, if you say send, you can see it will say bad request. Something went wrong here. It says 400 bad request. We don't have, or something went wrong with this part. We can actually check what went wrong. If I can go back to my IntelliJ, okay, there's no problem here. Did I do something wrong here? So that's question, add, let me just send a request. Method not allowed because we are by default going for get. So post is actually working. We are sending, okay, we are not sending data. So what I will do is I will go to Postman. So let's try to send data this time. So you can see it says bad request. So we are not sending data. So I will go to body and click on raw, or you can select JSON here, or JSON data. And you can paste a dummy record. So we have this thing. We already have this question. I will just customize it. I don't want to mention the ID. I want it to be auto-generated. And I want to customize the question as well. Just trying to increase the size of this. I don't want to see the history. Okay, so this question need to be changed. So I will say this question is maximum value for byte in Java. So what's the maximum value you can store in byte? So let's put some options there. Of course, you can do that in a form. Let's say 100. We got 127. We got 255. And let's say this is 999. The right answer is 127, if I'm not wrong. And this is easy. So let's say easy and done. So once we have specified the JSON data, what I can do is I can click on send, and now we got a internal error. Okay, let's see what the error is. Okay, it says the ID 1 already exists. Duplicate value for primary key. I've mentioned this sequence, right? So should I go for identity? Let's try with identity. Let's try. Click on send. Okay, we got it. So basically, instead of using sequence, we should be going for identity. And you can see it says success. I'm just curious to know the ID for that. So I will say get. I want to get all questions and send. Okay, you can see we got 17. So it is automatic. So we have to say identity there because that's what we have configured in the database. So that depends upon what type of column you're creating a database, right? So 17 works, and you can see we got the question as well. And that's how basically you add. So to add, you have to use Postman or any API tool you want to use. So we are saying we are fetching all this data. Cool. Anything else we can do here? Looks good. So yeah, we were able to fetch data by category, and we were able to add data as well. Now for this, we can also use update and delete. So if you want to use delete, you should be using a delete mapping here. Okay, so try that as assignment, okay? And let me know your answer in the comments. So instead of using post, you have to say delete mapping. Instead of using, for update, you have to use put mapping. And we have methods as well. So in DAO, basically, if you go to QuestionService, basically, let's say, I want to delete this. So I can say question DAO dot, there's an option of delete as well. And there's an option of update. There's an option of, in fact, we say save. So save is used for both update and save. So I hope that makes sense. So try it out and let me know in the comments. Now, is it complete? Not exactly. We have to do a lot of different stuff. First of all, we have to add exceptions here. If something goes wrong, we have to also specify the status codes. So for that, we are going to use response entity. And then we have to also use question service or the quiz service, because questions are done. The quiz is remaining, right? How do you create a quiz? How do you play the quiz? Playing will not be doing maybe. Let's see how it goes. Okay, so now we have a project which is working, right? So basically from the user side, we can get all the questions. We are able to get the question based on a category, and also we were able to add a question, right? So now this almost sums up our question service. Now, of course, we will enhance it so that we can handle the exceptions, which we have not done till now. And also we want to work with HTTP response status codes. The thing is, if you have ever went to a website, of course you do that, right? Sometimes when the website is not available, or when you enter a wrong link, you get an error, right? Which is very famous, 404. Now, what are these status codes and to whom it is helpful? Of course, as a normal user, when you look at these numbers, of course, 404 is very famous. So it makes sense to remember it. But there are multiple status codes which you don't have to by heart as a user. It's the job of a developer to show some perfect message or a good message to the user. Hey, this is what went wrong, right? And normally we do that on the client side. So based on the response which we receive from the server, a client side application will generate some message, right? So let's say if you request for a resource and the resource is there, you will get a status by saying 200, which is okay, you got the response. So the status is okay here. What if you got an error, the resource is not there, which is 404, right? So file not found. So instead of printing 404, we could have print file not found, right? In the same way, we have multiple status code. So let me show you that here. Now we are on to the Mozilla Documentations, and you can see we have different status codes available here. So basically we have 5. We got informational responses, which comes under 100 to 199. And then we got successful response, which is 200 to 299. Redirection messages, 300 to 399. Client error, 400 to 499. And then server, which is 500 to 599. So basically, if you talk about whatever information you want to get, you can send in this. When you get success in terms of resource is there, resource got created, anything successful will be part of this 200 series. What if there's something wrong with the client side? I mean, as a client, you made some mistake, by maybe entering a wrong path or something like that. So that's why you will get 400. What if something is wrong on the server side? There's some bug, something arised. So that's your 500 series. In fact, if you want to get more details, we have more here. Example, we got 200, which we're going to use a lot. So let's say when you request a data from a server and data is there, you got the data. So with the data, also send this status code that, hey, it is 200. If you don't want to remember the numbers, you can remember the names. Okay, so 200 is okay. What if you want to create something on the server? Let's say we created a question, right? So when you create a question, the response you should get is created. So that's what you have to respond from the server side. And list goes on. There are multiple options here, which we are going to use. In fact, you can also specify 400 errors, which is bad request. Whatever the client is trying to access is not there on the server. Maybe the client is not authorized to do that. Forbidden error, not found error, if the resource is not available. And method not allowed. Example, let's say on the server side, you're saying it's a get method, but you're sending a post request. So it's a method not allowed error. And then we can also go for 500 series, in which there is something wrong with the server internally and bad gateway. So something with the server side. Okay, so let's get back to our code. So what we're going to do is first let's try to handle the exceptions, and then we're trying to handle the codes. So what I will do is, before that we have one more thing. We need to also specify, how do you specify the status code? So let's say you are into question controller, right? And now here you are responding with all the questions. Now at this point, we are returning a list of questions. So we can return only one data, right? How do you return data as well as status code to the client? And that's where we got something called response entity. So instead of returning a list of questions, what you can do is you can create a new object here, which is of response entity, because that's what you're returning now, response, which is in a format of entity. Now it will have two parameters basically. The first one is the actual data which you want to return, and the second one is the status code. So in this case, when you are fetching data, I can say HTTP status dot, you don't have to remember the numbers, you can simply say okay. So this works. So in the constructor of response entity, you're passing two things, the data and the status code. Okay, it is giving you an error is because what you are returning is not matching. So what I will do is I will just change this to response entity, and then we are returning a list. Okay, so this is what you can do. So what you are sending is not just the data, but also the status code. Okay, now either we can do that here, or also we can do that in this service. The reason we will be doing that in service as well is because we have to handle the exception, right? Something like this. Let's go back to service, and here I will do it for get all questions. So here, instead of returning the list of it, we can also say response entity here, because I want to handle the exception as well. So it will make much more sense to do that here. And instead of returning this, we can say new response entity, and then we can pass it here. We can pass two parameters. In fact, we have to pass two parameters. The first one is the data, because of course the find all is giving you data. And the second one is the status. So HTTP status dot OK, right? Now, since we are doing that here, we don't need to do that in the controller. So here we can simply return the data itself, which you are getting from the service, because service itself is giving you response entity, right? Because if you see all get all questions, it is actually returning response entity. So you don't have to write that there. Okay, but this is a good scenario, right? So if everything works well, it works well. But what if you got the error? Now that's where you have to handle the exception. So what we're going to do is we'll be opening a try block, and we'll put that inside a try block. And then we'll write a catch as well. If something goes wrong, I want to print the exception message on the console. I can say e.print stack trace. And then I also, okay, see, the thing is, we can return in try, but we have to also return what if something goes wrong. In that case, this will not be returned, right? So what you can do is you can just copy this and paste it here. If something goes wrong, you can return an empty array. So you can say new array list, not array list. So instead of returning the questions, we are returning an empty array, but the status will not be okay. The status can be here, the bad request. Right? So that's how we can handle this. So we are handling the exception, and we're also using response entity here. Now with that, basically we are using status code, as you mentioned, HTTP OK, HTTP status dot OK, HTTP status dot bad request. Now if you go back to the controller, here we don't have to do anything. We can just do this. We can get all the questions and return it. So now the advantage of this is if I restart the server and if I go back to my Postman, Okay, this is the request we were sending, right? So now if I send this request once again, you can see we got the data, but with data we also got 200 okay, right? And that's what is working. But what if you make some mistakes here? Maybe you're not authorized, maybe you have done something in behind the scene that only the authorized user should be able to get that, and then a user is not logged in. In that case, you can return unauthorized, something like that. So that's where it is helpful. We can also try it for other methods which we have. Example, we got category here. So instead of returning a list, we can return a response entity. We can put that here. And the same thing, we need to return in this format of, okay, we are doing that in a controller. Okay, we need to do that in controller, but also I need to do that in service. So if I go back to service here, so get question by category. So here we have to also respond with response entity, and then we need to return an object of response entity. Just put that as a parameter and the status code. So I can put status code here, which is http status dot okay, right? But of course we also need to get try catch here. So I can simply copy this code from here, and since I'm lazy, and then we can replace the statement here. In fact, it will make much more sense when we do it for the add. Of course, for add also, we will be sending a response entity, but this time the type will be of type string, the primary data type you're sending. And then here we have to say new response entity. So you will send the data. Okay, no, we are doing that from the service, right? Okay, so the job of service here is to respond it now, right? So where is add? Add is here. So in this, basically we'll be sending a response entity with the angular brackets, and then you will be returning not just success. So now we have to return the new response entity, and now success becomes a part of that object. Now which status we have to specify here? So it should be http status dot, think about this. Okay, now since we are getting data on the server, it should be created as we defined earlier. Okay, looks cool, right? Now let's try to call this particular method, of course with the same data which we have here. So I will say post. In fact, I have a history here for the question add, and then we got body. Let me say the maximum value for short. I don't remember the short maximum value. It should be 63. Hopefully, doesn't matter, right? So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, and the answer is, let's say 3. I don't remember at this point, and I don't even want to calculate. If you're thinking I should calculate and do it, I'm lazy. So you can see I'm sending data and I'm sending a post request. And now when I click on send, okay, the thing is we need to restart the application. See, if you do that, if you send this data without response entity, it says 200, but we want 201, which is created. So we just have to restart the server with the new changes. Okay, everything looks good. And let's create the same question again. I don't know, it will create an issue. No. Okay, you can see we got success, and this time the status code is 201. So the client side, of course, a client will not be using a Postman, right? They will be using something fancy, some UI tool, mobile, or some React application, which looks good. In that case, as a UI developer, it is your job to accept the status code and display the appropriate message on the console, on the screen for the user. So that's how basically we use this. Okay, so now once you understood response entity and exception handling here, of course we have not done the handling here, but yeah, you can take care of it. So that's your assignment. Complete this part, write the exception handling for this. Okay, so now our question service is all set. So basically we got a CRUD operation on question, right? So we can create question, we can read question, we can update and delete. Of course, we have not added the update delete option here, but then you can do that, right? So that's not important for this videos. Now, if you go back to question controller, we have worked with all questions. We have worked for the question with category, right? So we are able to get all those things. Now the point is, why we are doing all this thing is because we want to create a quiz application. So let's say we have two different roles here. We have an admin and then we have normal user. As an admin, I can create a quiz, right? So let's say I'm also a trainer. So tomorrow I'm going to take a session in which after the session, I want to arrange a quiz. So day before, I will just create a quiz. Now, the moment I reach there in this session, I will start the quiz, right? So basically, the creation of quiz is handled by the admin. Of course, we are not going to add the roles in this particular project, but imagine if you have something like that, you can do it. But we'll give an option for someone to create a quiz. And now let's say I'm going to start a quiz. So as a user, they will fetch. So once the quiz started, they can fetch a quiz on their client application. It can be a browser or it can be a mobile application, and they can see the questions on their screen. That's the entire idea here, right? So basically, we should be able to create a quiz. Now, how do we create a quiz? Let's say we have so many questions, right? If I go back to my Postgres, which is here, you can see we have so many questions. We got 16 questions of different topic. Of course, we have Java and Python here. Now, basically, I want to fetch, let's say, Java questions, right? And we can also specify what difficulty level you want. But let's say we want to fetch Java questions and 5 Java questions, basically. So from a client side, you can, or maybe when you create a quiz, as a quiz creator, I can say, okay, I want to create a Java quiz with 5 questions. So my application will randomly pick up any 5 questions out of this. Of course, we don't have to go in sequence. It will pick up any 5 questions and it will be creating a quiz for you. That's what we want to achieve, right? So how do we do it? So in that case, if I go back to my IDE, here we are working with the question controller. We are working with questions and all the stuff, which looks good. So what I will do is I will just close all these windows because I want to focus only on few now. So basically the first thing you will do is you will create a controller. Now, how do you want to create a quiz? So maybe I will go back to my browser or maybe Postman. And here the URL I want to use is, let's say, something like this. I want to create a quiz, and then this quiz will be of type, let's say, the category. Or we can also do this, something like this. I want to create a quiz /create ? Of course, you can do it in the address bar. You can send data in the address bar. Why do we have to send data? We have to specify, right, what topic you want to select and how many questions you want. So we can do that on the browser, or you can basically send from the JSON. Okay, so initially, let's go with the browser version. So I can specify the category here. So the ? category is equal to Java. And then I also want to specify, so I have to say and number of questions. So I can say number of questions, which is equal to, let's say, 5. And we can specify difficulty level as well. Or we can mention a title. So let's say every quiz needs a title as well. So at the end, I can mention the title equal to J quiz. Now, basically, this is what I want, right? I want to create a post request, and then this is what I want to fetch. When I click on send, of course, it will not work. You can see we got an error here, which is not found. So let's create this one. How do I do that? I will create a controller here and we'll say new class. Now this will be a quiz controller. So let's click on enter. Now you can see we got a quiz controller here. So let's do the housekeeping stuff here, which is this is a REST controller. Let's specify the request mapping. Now this will be happening for the quiz, right? So the URL starts with the quiz. Okay, so once we got our controller here, we need to create a method, right? Because we want to accept, because if you go back here in the Postman, we need a method for create, right? So we have mentioned quiz. Now we have to create a method for create here. So I will go back here and say public. Now, once the quiz is created, of course, I want the response. So I will say response entity, and I want to return a string and the method name, let's say create quiz. Now here we are, of course, we have to mention the get mapping here. So let's do that quickly. So get mapping. No, this is not get mapping. This is post mapping, right? Because we are sending a post request. So post mapping, and in bracket, this is for a create URL. So we got for quiz /create. And then it is actually accepting few values, right? So you can see in the address bar, we are sending the category, we are sending number of questions, we are sending the quiz. So let's accept this in some variables. So here I will say, so if you want to accept the URL variables, you have to use request param. This first one is category. The second one is the number of questions. Okay, number of question can be int, right? Int, we can reduce the number of words here just by saying nums questions, or maybe numq. Yeah, that looks cool. So let's have numq here. Oh, not request mapping, it is request param. And then we need one more, which is at the end. Now again, we have to say request param, and this is for string title, right? So we have to accept these values. Now, once we got these values in our method, we can use it to create a quiz. right? And who is responsible to get a quiz? Of course, controller will not do it, right? We can use something called a quiz service. We don't have it yet, but I want to do that, right? So at this point, I will not return anything. I will just return the new response entity. And here I will say, I am here, just to see if everything is working. And then I will also return the HTTP status code, which is okay. Now let's run this to see if everything is working fine. I will just restart the application. Okay, looks cool. Let me just go back to Postman and say send. Okay, you can see it says I'm here. At least the URL is working. Of course, you can print the values as well. But let's say this is working. But we don't want the I'm here message, right? What we want is the data. We want to get a quiz, actual quiz. Now, who is responsible to do that? So of course, I will not be returning it here. What I will do is I will ask my quiz service to do that. So I will say quiz service dot, and there should be a method, but unfortunately we don't have quiz service. So what we will do is we have to create a quiz service. So what I will do here is let me create a quiz service class, and we also need the object of it, but unfortunately we don't have this class. So I can just click here and say, hey, give me a class. In which package? In the service package. Click on OK, and you got an empty class here. Now, first of all, this is a service. So this is a service. What else we need? So again, we know all those things, and that's why I'm going a bit fast, but logic is important. So here, when you want to create a quiz, of course, we want to create a quiz, and it should be stored in a database. As I mentioned before, I'm going to take a session tomorrow. So today, if I create a quiz, it should be there in the database. Otherwise, when I go tomorrow there, I will lose all the data. So when I say create a quiz, it should create a table which will have the quiz ready. Now, if you understand quiz better, see, we have questions, right? And questions can be of different topic. We have some for Java, we have some for Python. Maybe we can also add for Kotlin. We have different topics there, right? Now, when I create a quiz, or maybe for one particular topic, we can create multiple quiz. We got Java 1, Java 2, Java 3. So we have different quiz available for Java. And it may happen that the questions are repeated in some of the quizzes. So let's say there's a question number 5, which is there in the quiz 1 and quiz 2 as well. Now, in this case, if you want to store this data in the database, how will you do it? So basically, we have a quiz table, and then we have a question table. Now, we have to map it as well, right? So there are different type of mapping available. We have one-to-one. So when we are sure that one quiz will only have one question, that is one-to-one. One-to-many, one quiz can have multiple questions, which is true in our case. But then in one-to-many, you cannot have the same question in different quiz. But in our case, we have that. 2 different quiz can have the same question, right? So we have to go for many-to-many. Now, in terms of many-to-many, we create an extra table. We'll see that in the database once we do that. But basically, we need to work with the DAO as well. So here, we have to say quiz DAO. I will say this is quiz DAO. And okay, am I using auto wiring here? Let's do that. Okay, let's do auto wiring here as well at auto wired. And now we need this interface as well. So I will click here. I will say create an interface quiz DAO in the DAO package, right? And if you want this to work, you need to extend JPA, not index holder, JPA repository. Now this will take 2 things, the type of the table you're working with, which is quiz, and the type of primary key, which is integer. But if you want to work with quiz, we need a class quiz, right? So there are so many things we need to create. Oh, we don't have a quiz class. So let's create a quiz class. I know I'm jumping here, there, but that's how you build project, right? You have dependencies and you understand what are the things we require. So basically we need to create a class called quiz, which will be in the model. Do we have a model here? Yeah, we have. So you can see we got quiz here. And our question was not in model. Let me just move question to model. Okay, so what are the things we need in quiz? So not much actually, we need only 3 things. The primary key for the quiz table. We need a title because every quiz will have a title. So next time when I want to start a quiz, I should know which title I want to play. And also we need questions. So that for that particular quiz, what are the questions we have? And we cannot have everything in one table because one quiz can have multiple questions, right? So it makes sense to have it in different table. So we call them as mapping tables, right? So what I will do is I will just create a primary key here. So which is private integer ID. and then private string title, and then private. Okay, now since we have one quiz can have multiple questions, so it should be list of questions. And I can say these are questions. Import the package. Okay, but then this also need to create a table, right? So I have to first mention this as an entity, and also we need to use Lombok to create getter and setter. And okay, why there's an error in quiz? Oh, it should have a primary key. So this should be ID. And also we want this to be auto-generated. So generated value, strategy equal to generated type identity. Okay, see, we have done this. We have done all of this thing for questions, and that's why I'm doing this fast without wasting time. We need to import the package for questions. Done. Why there's problem with the questions? Questions are okay. We're not able to import the questions, is it? Oh, it's in the same package. Then what's the issue? Basic attribute type should not be a container. Okay, I think it is because of the mapping. So basically, if you want to achieve many-to-many, you have to use @many-to-many. Oh, that was the issue. Okay, so my idea is becoming very, very smart now. I thought there's some syntactical issue. Okay, so you can see it says you have to do mapping, which is many-to-many, because we have a quiz with multiple questions, right? So the mapping is important. Okay, once we got quiz, we can actually create this quiz now, and that is done. We don't need to worry about this particular interface now. Let's go back to service. Now it is this service responsibility to create a quiz for me. So now question arises, how exactly it will create a quiz? So let's try that. So first of all, I will create a method, which is the method which I want to create here. So if you can see, okay, what I will do is I will not be writing from here. Let me go to the controller where I want to use this method, and I can say I want to have a method name which is create quiz, and this will take 3 parameters: category, the numQ, and the title, right? So this is the method I want. Now the advantage is if I click here and if I click on create method, it will give me that method. I don't have to type that manually, and I can simply create a quiz now. Now to create a quiz, what are the things we need? We can simply create the object, right? We can say quiz. Of course, we need to import the package for this. We can say quiz is equal to new quiz, and then we can set the values, right? So the quiz will have set ID, which is the, okay, set ID should be auto-generated. So we can say set title. Title is coming from here. But then quiz also wants questions, right? Because we have three things there. We got ID, which is auto-generated, so we don't have to worry about it. Title is something we have specified. But what about the questions? Now these questions will actually coming from the database, right? So even if I say set questions, you can see we don't have that here. So we have to get the questions first. How will you get the questions? Again, simple. You can ask your DAO layer to give you that. So I can say I want a list of questions. I can say questions. We need to import the package. So if I say list of questions here, and now we need to fetch that from database, right? So I can ask my quiz DAO. Okay, not actually quiz DAO. You know, the thing is, the questions are coming from question DAO, because the questions responsibility is for the question DAO, not the quiz DAO. So we need to get the hold on both. So first let's get the question DAO, because that's where the questions are. Now we cannot say find all. The thing is, when you say find all, it will give you all the questions. What we want is specific number of questions for a topic. So what we can do is we can create some method. We can say find random questions by category. Okay, so what we are saying is give me questions, and we also give me questions limited to, let's say, number which I have specified here, 5 questions, 2 questions, and then with a category. So of course you have to pass these 2 things. You have to pass the category and you have to pass the number of questions you want, right? And we don't have this method. If you can see, the DAO is not having this method. Let's create one, and we just have to create the interface, right? Now you're thinking, oh, this should be easy, right? Because the JPA gives you everything. See, JPA can give you things till a point, right? After that, you have to get the data from by yourself. And that's why you have to write the SQL queries. Now don't worry, we'll not be writing SQL query. We'll be writing the native queries here. Now, how do you write a query? So for a particular method, if you want to execute a particular query, you can use something called a query annotation. You can see it's coming from DataJPA. And in this bracket, you can mention your query. So you basically have to specify 2 things. One is the query, and second, is it native? Yes, it's native. But what is a query? Now that's where you have to write the JPQL query here. So we'll say select star from question, that's your table name, Q where. So basically we have to fetch question from the question table, but then what should be the where clause? First of all, the category should match with what we are passing. So I can say Q dot category need to match with my category. So that should be equal to, okay, how do I specify this variable here? Now if you want to specify the variable, because the value will be coming from the variable, right? You have to give a colon. So colon category. And then now you also need only 5 questions. So basically we can say, okay, let's order by because we want to do it in random. So we can say order by random. So they are the inbuilt functions, so we can get random questions. Okay, we will get random, but how about limiting the numbers? So that's where we'll be using limit. Of course, teaching you the SQL now or the query language now will take a lot of time. So I will just simply use those data here. And that's it. You got your query. Okay, looks good. Let's see if something goes wrong, we'll debug it. So that's your query. And now, once you got your query, this will work now. You will get your questions and you just have to add your questions in the service. So we have done with that. So once you got your quiz ready, because this is what will create a quiz, right? Now, once you got your quiz ready, you just have to use the quiz DAO to save the quiz. So we'll say save, and we are saving this particular quiz, right? So we have generated random questions with the title, and now you are saving it. Okay, looks like it should work, but you have to return the response as well. So also return new response entity. We can return a message, success, if everything goes well. Of course, we should handle the exception as well, but let's do that later. HTTPS dot created. Okay, looks like we have done with the create quiz, but is it really working? First of all, we have not, okay, we don't do mapping here. We can simply do mapping, that's done, create done. Okay, I hope this will work. Let's try, restart the application, go back to Postman and say send. Okay, we got success. You can say we got 201, but I'm not sure is it really worked in the first attempt. Let's try. Go back to your tables. You can see we only got one table here, but if I refresh, okay, we got 2 more tables. The quiz will have quiz, right? So if I will say all rows, but if you observe, we only have 2 columns here. We got quiz ID, which is 1 auto-generated, and this was a title, right? The quiz, JQuiz was title. If you remember in Postman, that's what we have done here, JQuiz. But what are the questions? For this particular quiz, what are the questions? And that's where we have a separate table. If you say view data here, and you will see the quiz created. So basically we have for Java and question number 18, 8, 17, 6, and 19. Okay, do we have all these questions as Java? Remember these numbers, 18, 8, 17, 6, 19. Let's see if everything is going well. I will just say view all rows. I think 16, 17, 18 was that. 16, okay, 17, 18, 19 was that. That's for Java. And 6 and 8. Okay, so we are right. So basically this is working. Let me just verify once again. It should start from 17. Yeah, there's no 16 here. So yeah, it worked. So basically we were able to create a quiz with 5 questions. So we were able to create a quiz. Now it's time to fetch that quiz. So when we create the quiz, the data goes into our database, right? So we have created 2 extra tables. So we already had a question table. Now we created a quiz table, and then we created a table where we can have all the questions for a particular quiz. Just to show you that, what I can do is I can go to my PG admin. You can see we got this table here, which is quiz and quiz questions. And if I open quiz here, we can see we have different columns. We have ID and title. And then in the quiz questions, we have 2 columns. One is quiz ID, second is quiz questions. Okay, so basically in this, every quiz will have multiple questions. That's what we are saying here, right? But now what I want to do is I want to basically fetch these questions. So let's say as a normal user, if I want to attempt a particular quiz, how do I fetch the quiz? So I can mention a quiz ID and then I will get all the questions. That's what we want to achieve here. To do that, what I will do is I will go back to my IntelliJ, and here let's create a method. So basically we have to do that in a controller. Now what type of request I want to send? So of course it will be for quiz. Instead of create, we can say get, right? And we have to also pass the ID. So example, if I go to my Postman, this was for creation of quiz, right? Which we have already done. So now this time, instead of creating a quiz, we will say get the quiz. So quiz/get, and I can specify the ID of the quiz, 1, 2, 3, 4. Of course, when you have a good UI, you can basically see all the quiz title and you can select one. At this point, we don't have a UI, so let's get used to the numbers here. And this will be a get request. So if I click on send, okay, it says 404 at this point, but we want to make it work. We want to return the data. So what I will do is I will go back to my IntelliJ and let's create this method. So I will say public, it will say response entity because that's what we are going to use now. And this will return the list of questions, right? List of questions. And we'll say this is get, okay, we have to import for list as well. I can say get quiz questions. And basically we have to also pass the ID, right? So whatever ID you're receiving from our client side, we basically have to use it. So I will say this is get mapping, and I can say this is for get. So for the get request, but also we'll specify the ID as well, right? And that is going into the curly brackets because the ID may change in future. Someone wants to fetch the ID 1, 2, 3, 4, doesn't matter. So here, since I'm using a variable, we have to use path variable. And then this should be of type integer ID. So of course, whatever data you will receive here will be stored in this ID now. And then based on that, we have to fetch the quiz. Now here's a twist. The twist is, when you say you are fetching the questions of a quiz, the problem is, on the client side, you are sending questions that perfectly make sense. A question will have a question title, a question will have options, a question will also have the right answer. Because if you see the question model or question class here, it also has a right answer. I don't want to send this to the client. That is risky, right? So what we have to do is we cannot send that. So let's create a wrapper of this question, which will only have, which will have all the columns except the answer. And the way you can do that is by creating a new class, and we'll name this as a question wrapper. And then we just need to put few variables which we have in question. So what I can do is I can just go back to question, and I want private ID, I want this, this. Okay, I think this number of things are enough. We don't need right answer. We don't even need difficulty level because we are fetching the questions, right? So we don't need that. And also we don't need category. So what I can do is I can simply go back to question wrapper and paste this here. And since I want to use Lombok so that I don't have to define the getter setters, and also I need a parameterized constructor. So we can use Lombok, or let me just generate quickly here. Generate a constructor which will take all these parameters. Now the advantage of this particular class is if you go back to your quiz controller, okay, don't need this one. No, I don't need question. So if you go back to your quiz controller here, we are not returning the question class. We are basically returning the list of questions, which are question wrapper, which will have questions and options, but not the answers. And now basically how will you get the question? Of course, it's the job of my quiz service to give me the questions. I will say get quiz questions, and I can pass this ID, whatever ID, the quiz ID I have. Okay, we don't have that method there. So I will say return because return is missing. Okay, so let's create this method. So I will just click here and create a method in the quiz. But what will be the logic? Now it's actually very simple. We just need to fetch the quiz object from the database. I think our job will be done. And how do you do that? So of course we do have the quiz DAO, right? So let's use the quiz DAO. And if you can see, the quiz DAO will ask you for, if you want to get, or you have to say find by ID, and the ID here is ID itself, and that's it. It will give you the quiz, right? So let's store that in a quiz object. So I will say quiz. Okay, there is some problem here. It says this find by ID might not return any data, right? Of course, if you have a quiz ID which is there in the database, it will return data. But what if you are mentioning a quiz ID which is not there? In that case, it will throw a null error, right? Or null. We have to basically handle the null values. And that's where we got a new feature called optional. So we can say this is optional data. The data might come or not, I'm not sure. So let's say optional. Okay, so what exactly we're going to do here? We will get the quiz. With the quiz, we'll get the questions, right? Because now the quiz object actually has the questions. But then we have to convert those questions into question wrapper. Remember, we are not returning questions, we are returning question wrapper. So how will you do that? So first of all, let me get hold on the quiz questions. So I can say list of question. I can say questions from DB, and this will get, I will get from quiz. So I will say quiz.get. So when you use optional, we have to first get the object, and then you can say get questions. So get questions will give you these questions, right? So now we got the question from database, but we can't return it. Example, if I say I want to return this data now, we can't, because the wrapper, the list is of question wrapper, not of questions. So we have to manually convert each question into a question wrapper. So we can use a loop here. So let me create that object of question wrapper here. So list of question wrapper, I will say questions for users. Now basically this is questions from database which we got, and what we want to return is questions for user, and we'll say new add list. So we got an empty list here, and we just have to add data. So what I will do is I will just return, so that I will not get any error, response entity. Ultimately we have to return the questions for user, right? And the HTTP status as okay. Okay, so but then before returning, we need to add data, because this is empty at this point. We want to add data. How will you do that? So we can use a for loop here. So I can say for question queue in questions from DB. So let's get hold on each question, and then every time you will create a new question wrapper object. So I will say question wrapper. I will say this is QW equal to new question wrapper. And then here we have to set the values. Remember, in the question wrapper, basically we have a constructor. So I can use that constructor here. So what are the values I have to pass? I have to pass the title. So basically I have to pass the ID first. So where is my question wrapper? Yeah. So we have to pass the ID, title, and option 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do that quickly. So here let's fetch the ID first, get ID. Then we'll fetch dot get title. Then q dot get option 1, then q dot get option 2, then q dot get option 3, comma last one, q dot get option 4. And that's it. Basically we created this object with all those values, and once we got this object, we just have to add this to the list. So I will say question for user dot add, and we are adding this particular question, which is QW. Okay, so basically we were able to convert, or we were able to fill this particular question for users with the help of the questions from database. And I think we are good. It looks good. We can call this method, and from the controller, we are sending it. It should return data now. I hope everything is set. Let's restart the server. I think it's done. Let's go back to our Postman, and let's say send. Oh, can you see that we got the questions? Now this is the same thing which we checked earlier, right? Remember ID 18, ID 8, and all these are Java questions. And what you got here is ID, question title, and options. This is what a user will see. Now when user attempt this particular quiz, of course, right, we'll be having a particular UI, and you will see one question at a time. And then once a user has entered all the answers, when you click on submit, the data, the answered data goes to the server. And on the server side, we have to calculate then, okay, the score, and then we have to return. But then we have not done for the calculation, which we'll do in the next video. But basically what we have done here is we were able to get a particular quiz with a ID. Okay. Now, once a client has received these questions and the client is answering that, and of course, a client will also send that data to the server. That's why we have to calculate this code. And for that, let's see you in the next video. Now it's time to create a function or a method which will calculate the result. Of course, right, when you submit this question on a client side, basically because we were able to create questions, we were able to create quiz, and then we were able to get the quiz as well. And now when a client wants to send the responses on the server, of course, to get the score, it's our job now on the server side to calculate it. So what kind of response a client will send? So let's understand that. Let's go back here to the Postman. Now, if you say a quiz, this is a quiz which we have created, right? The ID for this quiz is 1. And when I click on send here, you can see these are the questions we have. So in total, we got 5 questions. We got question number 18, question number 8, then 17, 6, and 19, right? Now, in our example, the question number 19 and 18, they are same because we were doing some experiment and then we've added the same question 2 times. And even in random format, it was able to get the same question. That's weird. But anyway, the point is, when a user is getting these questions and when they answer, let's say for this particular question, the answer is, let's say 3, and then a user says 2, of course a wrong answer. For this particular question, let's say the answer is, I'm not even reading question, let's say the answer is D, and then a user is selecting D. Now in that case, it is correct answer. Once a user gets the data, from the client side, when a user submits the response, how you can send that to server? So what you can do is you can send 2 things. See, we don't need all these things when you're sending the response, right? You need only 2 things. First, you need the question ID because that's unique for every question. And you need the right answer which a user has selected. So not right answer, but a user response. So can I say we are sending 2 things to the server where you have ID and response, something like this. So we will be creating a new request, which will be for submit, not for get, but for submit. And we have to mention the quiz ID. So for which particular quiz a user is attempting that. So let's say the quiz ID is 1. But now we want to send responses, right? Now for the responses, what you can do is you can just click on raw here, and we want JSON format. But the data which we want here is different. So of course we are going to send the list of responses. So we'll use list there. And then each response will have an ID. So let's say the ID in this case is, okay, we have to get the IDs as well. So the first ID is 18. So the ID 18, the response selected from the user. So we can say response colon, whatever the response was. Now what we will do is, first of all, we don't know the answers, right? And what I will do is, I will just remember this. I'll try to remember this. Where we got 18. Let me just write it somewhere. I will write it here. So we got 18, 8, 17, 6, and 19. Of course, I do remember the answers for this, but you should never trust your own knowledge. You should always confirm from the database, right? What if something goes wrong with the database itself? So what I will do is I will just try to fetch the answers from database. The way you can do that is by going to the PG admin, and here we can fire a query. So basically we want the answer, right? So let me just, I don't need this. I can keep it here. So can I edit this query? No, let me just go to query tool. So basically I'm into Postgres PG admin now, and I want to fetch the ID for particular question, and I want to fetch the right answer for that particular question. I think the right answer column name is right answer, if I'm not wrong. Let's try. From question where, in fact, let me just put where below here, where ID is equal to. So now we need all these IDs here, right? So I can just paste it here. So ID is equal to 8, or okay, so ID can be 18, ID can be 8, 17, 6, and 19, so that I will get all the answers here. And run this, you can see we got the answers, right? So for question number 18 and 19, it's 3. So that becomes easy. Question number 6 is this, question number 8 is this, and question number 17 is this. So normally we are sending the response itself. Maybe you can customize it and don't send the answer. You can send the option number. So A, B, C, D, that works. But there's only one problem. If you want to randomize the option, so on the server side, let's say you have A, B, C, D in sequence, the answers, or the options, but then when you're sending that to client, maybe you want to randomize it there. In that case, it will not work. So it's good to check the right answer instead of checking the options. Okay, so this looks cool. We got the answer here. So what we will do here is the response for 18 is this. I will just copy this. Response for 18 is this. And then I can just copy this. I'm just trying to recreate this. So fast forward, I will complete everything now. So as I mentioned, fast forward, we got all the options. In fact, we got the response created here, right? Now, this is what you are going to send on the server. So example, when I click on send, it should basically calculate the values and send the result. So how many are correct? Now, at this point, I have entered all the correct answer. So of course, this score should be 5, right? That's what we want. So how do we get this? So it's very simple. Let's go back to our IntelliJ. So since we are sending a request for the submit, so I will say post mapping, and this will be happening for submit. And we can also accept the quiz ID. So let's say this is the ID for the quiz. Now for this, we need to create a method. So I will say public. Now what we need to return, so I can simply say response entity, and what we want to return is a score, right? So we can return a score with the integer value, and I can name this as submit quiz. And what are the values we have to accept? Basically we have to accept two values. One, the ID which you are submitting here, the quiz ID, and second is the responses, right? So let me accept that here. Now this is a path variable, so I will use that, and it will go into integer ID. And next we need to accept the body, right? Now this is getting sent in the JSON format, so it will be this request body, and then we'll store that in a object. Now which object? Now basically we need an object which will have two values, the ID and response. So let me create a response object. So I will say response, and we are not sending one response, right? We are sending multiple responses. So I have to say this is a list of response. But unfortunately, we don't have response class, right? As you can see, we don't have response. So we need to create one. But why it is taking a response? Is it? Okay, there is an inbuilt class called response, and that's why it is taking it. But I want to have my own class of response. Okay, let me create a class here. So basically, in this particular model, we can create a class called response. So I will say this is a response. Now this will be a very simple class, just like question wrapper. The thing we need here is, so first of all, I want to use Lombok here, which is data. And then I also want a constructor. So I can say required argument constructor. It will give me parameterize and default constructor. And we just need two variables. So I will say private integer ID and private string response. So basically we got the variable name as response as well. So we got response class in which we have response as a variable. I know that sounds weird, but we can go with that. Okay, so we got this class, right? And once we got this class, I can just import that class here, control space and importing done. Now, once we got the response, we need to calculate now. How will we calculate? So basically that's where your service class comes into picture. So I will simply say return, and I will ask my quiz service to calculate, or maybe I can say, or maybe we can say calculate result. And then we have to pass the ID, the quiz ID, and we'll pass the responses. Of course, right, you will not be doing any calculation in the controller. So let's do that in the service, and let me create this method in the service. So method created. Now this is where the actual fun happens, right? Let me just verify the controller once if everything is good. Okay, looks good. Let's go back to service, and this is where you have to do the calculation. So here we need to add some logic. The first thing you have to do is we have to get a quiz object, because that's how you will get the quiz, right? Because in one quiz you have multiple questions. So with this ID here, we can get the quiz questions. So I can simply say, I want to get this from database. So I will say quizdow.find by ID. So give me that quiz question, and I have to pass the ID here. Now the only thing is, find by ID will give you optional data. So we want the data, so we can say get. So when you say get, you don't have to put optional here, which we have done before. If you can see, we have used optional here, but that's your choice. The better option is this, because here you can check if it is present or not. It's better to handle this way to write a better software. But since we just are learning phase, we can try this. Now once we got the quiz, it's time to get the questions from the quiz. And we'll put that in a list. So I will say list of question, and I will say questions is equal to, this will be coming from quiz. So quiz.get questions. Okay, now once we got the quiz question, now it's just comparing the values in the response and in the questions. That's it. That's the only thing you have to do. But how do you do it? Let's try. So of course we have to iterate to the loop. And I can iterate with response. So I can say response colon responses. So basically we have to just iterate from the list and check each answer. Now even if it is right, where you will put it? So how do you count the variable? So what we can do is we can say int right. This is a variable which you're creating, and default value will be 0. And then every time you see a right answer, you will just increment it. Now how do you compare? So basically we have to check if my response dot get response, if it is equal to the question. So we have to get the first question from the question, right? Okay. So responses and the quiz will be on the same format. So basically we have to compare this response from the questions, right? We have the question here. So what we can do is we can also use a variable to iterate. Maybe you could have just used a normal variable. Even that could have worked. So I can just say every time I do this, I just have to say I plus plus here. Okay, not in the if condition, of course. And then here we have to get the question, right? So I can say questions dot get with the index 1 or with the index I, and then we have to get the right answer. So we just have to compare with the right answer. If it is successful, then we can say write plus plus. That's it. Okay, I just hope it will work because we are using I plus plus and bugs are a part of a life, right? It says one more bracket missing, is it? So I need to close this one. Then I need to close this one. Done. Okay, why there's a problem here? Okay, so basically once you got the response, the right answer, you will return the value. So you will return the new response entity object, which will have the right answer and also the status code, which is http status.ok. Now let's verify. Now since we have all the right answers, the output should be 5. That's what we're expecting. So restart properly done. Let's head back to our Postman and say submit. Oh, we got 5. Now intentionally, I will just make one question wrong. Let's say this is not 4, this is not 3, this is 4. So that's the wrong answer I've given. Send, we got 4. Okay, let's make one more wrong. Let's say this is 128. I'm not even know the other answers, but all the other options. But let's try. Send, you can see we got 3. So that's right. We were able to send the response on the server and we got this code. Okay, so we are slowly building this thing, right? In fact, this is the only thing you have to do. So we got all these services which we need for the microservices. So what we have done till now is building a monolithic application where you have everything in one project. Of course, this project is simple. In enterprise world, we make complex project, but that's not important, right? The logic is not important. Important is how do you break down this project into small parts? How can we differentiate between the quiz service and a question service? So there will be 2 different services like microservices, and we'll see how do we interact with them. So that's your monolithic quiz application. So that's it from this video where we were able to create this, submit this, and I will share this project on GitHub as well. You will find the link in description, but we'll enhance it so that you can make a microservices out of it.